Who are you? No, seriously. Who are you? I know that might sound like a dumb question to some, maybe even to you, but to the majority of the population, it's a question that deeply resonates with them. In a study conducted by Tasha Eurich for her 2017 book Insight, it was reported that although 95% of the participants stated that they were self-aware, only 10 to 15% were actually confirmed to be. To be honest, no disrespect to Eurich intended, even that percentage seems a little too high. As human beings, we are constantly evolving, and the idea of being self-aware is something that I consider rather fleeting as we go through life, and by proxy said changes. Even when one is self-aware of the person that they truly are, it's not guaranteed to be a positive experience. Although it's not the only aspect that contributes to confidence in oneself, a 2020 survey from the popular company Massage Envy found that in a group of 2,000 respondents, 59% stated they weren't comfortable in their own skin, citing skincare issues, body image issues, and social media as three of the main perpetrators. It's already a very challenging task to know oneself, and when you add on the idea of also being confident and comfortable in oneself, you end up with someone who is quite the rarity. In 25 years of life, I can safely say that I have not met someone who is completely and unabashedly themselves, and simultaneously has discovered who they are at their core. I think that part of the reason why we see everyone engaging in a culture of one-upmanship and the facade of the perfect life that can lead to an unhealthy relationship with one's own being is because there haven't been many role models to look up to that are wholly at peace with themselves. When I do find people who exemplify those characteristics, I always view them as a beacon of light and positivity amongst a superficial wasteland. And there are zero other creators on YouTube who embody that description more than Garrett Watts, a 32-year-old ex-Viner from Memphis, or more accurately, all over the place, as he has divulged in multiple videos that he bounced around all over the country during his childhood. Now, as with most videos in the commentary and or video essay genre, we need to get the exposition out of the way in a part of the video I would like to call backstory time. Don't worry, I'll try and make it quick, but more than likely, it's not going to be quick. Garrett pursued higher education at a community college and went on to graduate from UCLA with a degree in film, before getting involved in the LA scene through creating content for Funny or Die and Vine, where he amassed a small following through some pretty solid vines, if I do say so myself. Through a chance super like on Tinder, he linked up with the scuzzbag of YouTube himself, Shane Dawson, and though a romantic relationship didn't blossom from the two smashing their lips together, a business relationship did happen to emerge. Dawson would consistently collaborate with Garrett and his other friend Drew Monson for scary videos about scary things and scary places. And surprisingly, none of them were about Dawson. Over time, Garrett started becoming a more integral part of Dawson's channel. They became business partners, he started featuring in almost every single video, and Garrett even found Dawson a cameraman and editor in Andrew Sawicki, who was a longtime friend of his. Through all of this involvement and the dedication and interest that he started showing on his own YouTube channel, Garrett's following continued to grow to the point where he was definitely considered a separate entity from Dawson, which is a decision that would come to save his career later on down the line. In the summer of 2020, our favorite year in recent memory, Dawson was buried by his past and the abhorrent actions he had participated in, and Garrett completely detached from that mess, which may or may not be my next video, shh, don't tell anyone, and brought Andrew along with him. The two now make videos on his channel as well as run a podcast on a separate channel called Sweet Boys. I started watching Garrett at the very end of 2017, which is when the whole Dawson and Bobby Burns collaboration happened. Up until that point, I had never watched a Dawson video because, contrary to what the internet will make you think, the disgusting things that Dawson was doing and the jokes he was making were very common knowledge amongst the majority of YouTube viewers. Plus, as a man with a compulsive obsession to watch every film in existence, I had the displeasure of watching his directorial debut, Not Cool, when it was initially released. If you ever need an indicator of the type of person that Shane Dawson is, go watch it. I dare you. Anyways, I was a huge fan of Bobby and his commentary content around that time. When I saw that he was going to be putting out a couple of videos with Dawson on his channel, which everyone knew would lead to Bobby's channel blowing up, I decided to tune into said videos. Naturally, they were absolutely tragic, and the way that Dawson attempted to manipulate Bobby and switch the narrative from him putting out a valid and well-put critique of his content to making it seem like he was a mindless hater who had his viewpoint completely turned around from mere hours of conversation was rather rough to watch. Through the 3 videos, because of my disdain for Dawson, my attention wandered over to something else, or someone else for that matter. As much as Dawson desperately clawed at being the center of attention, as he seemingly always does, the person who stole the show was this lanky guy with glasses who couldn't stop delivering quotable one-liners named Garrett. Plus, he was adorable, and I almost immediately fell in love with him. Could the subplot of this video possibly be me pitching myself as a potential partner for him? Yes. Should you mind your own business and just let me shoot my shot? Absolutely! Anyways, I was super confused as to how this guy managed to find his way into a Dawson video. His brilliant aura of pure positivity seemed to heavily contrast with the uninspired cynicism that his counterpart was known for. The saying opposites attract doesn't have any merit behind it when it comes to relationships, as supported by the phantom stranger technique, which would make sense why the two of them didn't work out in that sense. In contrast, there have been multiple instances where we have seen the opposites attract trope work on YouTube, with the most prominent and recent example being frenemies. Although we all know how that turned out. Regardless, I was surprised at the vast amount of charisma and humor that Garrett had on display, so I decided to go and check out his channel after the video had finished. His most recent video at the time was a mystery box video that acted as a companion piece for one on Dawson's channel. Immediately after I clicked play, everything that I enjoyed about him had reared its head tenfold. His editing style was super intense and fast-paced, but instead of it being annoying and difficult to keep up with, it maintained a perfect level of chaos that matched up with Garrett's personality. His kindness also shone through, as his ability to freely talk and get along with strangers, just like he did with Bobby, was a wonderful thing to watch. He had this aura of wholesomeness that I didn't see on many other channels, and it didn't come off as forced or for the camera. Frankly, I was in absolute awe. I had to calm myself down. I mean, this could only be a one-time thing, a fluke, a stroke of luck. Spoiler, it wasn't. I continued watching the rest of his catalog all the way back to his first video, which starred the iconic drag queen Miss Coco Peru gallivanting around Target. All of his videos managed to carry identical energy about them, a feeling akin to a bear hug from your best friend that you haven't seen in a couple of years. Now that we've gotten that information dump out of the way, let's get to the meat and potatoes of the video, with maybe a side of sliced veggies to keep you healthy. There are a multitude of reasons why I value Garrett as a positive voice on the platform, but the main one that I would like to hone in on with this video is his wonderful ability to just be himself. In fact, throughout his entire tenure on the internet, he has managed to exhibit that in many different and distinct ways. In order to properly delve into his psyche and the manner in which he exudes authenticity, it's imperative that we understand exactly who he is. I'm not talking about the technical background stuff that I went through previously. I'm talking about what makes Garrett. As I described in my anecdote, the first thing that sticks out when seeing him for the first time is his surplus of charisma, as he has the ability to light up any single room that he enters, as cliche as that sounds. He has this knack of being able to communicate with whatever type of person he has put before him and have them leave with nothing but overflowing praise. No matter who or what he is confronted with, he seems persistent to address it in the most positive and optimistic way possible. In a world where our media has become excessively cynical and real life has been a splitting image of such, he manages to truly be a calm breeze of warmth and cheerfulness in a desolate wasteland of monotony. In fact, he's managed to sustain that spirit throughout the totality of his career online in a multitude of forms, and it's vital that we go through those in order for you to get the big picture of what I'm getting at here. The best place to start, as any story should, is the beginning, which brings us to the now defunct, yet often immortalized platform, Vine. If you magically vanished from existence during the 2010s and re-entered the Earth realm for the 2020s, firstly, yikes, that's rough, and secondly, Vine was a social media platform where creators released, at maximum, 6-second videos. When I say that Vine was a cultural revolution, I'm not speaking hyperbolically. It's been 5 years since it completely shut down, and the impact that it had and the creators on it had is still reverberating throughout the internet sphere rather intensely. If you look at a lot of the biggest and most well-known creators on YouTube, such as the Paul brothers, David Dobrik, Lele Pons, Brent Rivera, and Gabby Hanna, they all started their online careers on Vine. Plus, if you look down the list to less successful channels that still have millions of subscribers, one of those being Garrett himself, they also migrated over to YouTube from Vine. It's even had an impact on more than just the internet, as arguably the most prominent person that was on Vine, King Bach, do any of us really know, is an actual movie star now, as he has had roles in films like the Babysitter series, To All the Boys I've Loved Before, Greenland, and Holiday. Vine's success has even leaked over into real life, as you can't drive past a road work ahead sign without the person in your passenger seat obnoxiously shouting, yeah, I sure hope it does. Beyond it persisting in its cultural relevance, however, Vine is often reminisced upon as not only one of the better social media platforms to ever exist, but also as a remnant of a certain aesthetic of simpler times that most people in their early 20s and late teens associate with the mid-2010s. I am willing to bet money that if I were to go interview random kids walking around a college campus, that at least 80% of them would have both a positive recollection of Vine and be able to quote one of their favorites. There's only one small problem that hasn't been given the proper attention, and that is the fact that Vine wasn't as utopian-esque as people depict it to be. In fact, it was actually quite the opposite. If you look into the people who made it to the top of the proverbial Vine mountain, the majority of the humor that they would utilize would be flat out derogatory. There are a couple more in-depth videos by T Noir, Kunkin Dastner, and Nick Lisakwa that I will link in my sources cited in the description. To keep it brief, at its peak, it was rather apparent that the most effective way to gain followers was to make content that revolved around racist and sexist stereotypes. Whether it be othering a different race or sex or self-stereotyping one's own group, it was a common thread amongst the stars of Vine to playfully poke fun of these traits. These creators weren't what made Vine a special platform, as there is a reason that the bountiful Vine compilations only consist of the random flash in the pan moments of organic and authentic humor. That being said, they are unfortunately what made Vine a successful platform. This is evident by the fact that every single person that I mentioned previously have exploited stereotypes in their Vines or have just been straight up racist, with Dobrik literally saying the N-word in one. And keep in mind, these are the poster children of the platform. They're the people who got the support from Vine on a constant basis and got rewarded with millions of dollars for what is indisputably bad behavior. There have even been fan favorites on YouTube who have participated in the blatant disrespect, with the most well-known being Cody Ko saying the N-word in one of his Vines. In fact, he still really hasn't been canceled for that. And that kind of encapsulates a very interesting idea about selective canceling, but that's for another video. Anyways, at this point, you have to be wondering how Garrett plays into this, and it's quite simple, really. I'm going to play a string of a couple Vines that he has made, and I want you to take a look and attempt to discern the major difference in his content as opposed to what I have been describing.
You can't have nightmares when you're going down the freeway. Hasn't anyone told you that, Buster Beans?
Sir, what's that? In your front right pocket there?
Oh, that? It's a wand holster?
Sorry, it's a wand. Let's play 3 truths and a lie.
Oh, yeah. Box.
Okay, you just said box 3 times. Box 4 times. Do you know how to play this?
No. That's weird. My bumblebee emoji isn't infrequently used. I use that one the most, so
Everyone I love will be dead someday. I know when that hotline blings.
If you answered that his humor doesn't revolve around demeaning people based on things that nobody should ever be demeaned for, you're correct. Moreover, his humor never seems to resort to cheap tactics to get a laugh. The crux of the comedy seems to be rooted in either extreme absurdity or blunt simplicity. The reason why I find this to be such an impressive feat is because he ran in the same circles as the people who I previously mentioned. He's lived in Los Angeles since he started to pursue a career in the entertainment industry, and he's been recorded at a myriad of functions with the Vlog Squad and their crew. This would make sense because his best friend, Andrew Sawicki, was both roommates with Carly and Aaron and rumored to have been dating Gabby Hanna. He has witnessed those heinous methods of social climbing work flawlessly and get the perpetrators more attention than they could ever possibly deserve. Yet Garrett has managed to never let that type of influence even remotely rub off on him. It's a very common thing for someone to gain even a modicum of success in Los Angeles and completely change the way that they are for the worse. Clout culture is very easy to get lost in, and before you know it, you come out an absolute train wreck. What people like so much about Garrett and what makes him almost immune to that type of sway is that he is as anti-mainstream Vine as one possibly can be. While his counterparts were trying their absolute hardest to portray themselves as relatable through gross stereotypes and overused punchlines, Garrett managed to do so effortlessly by simply being himself. After watching through most of his Vines in the archive, which took me much longer than I would care to admit, I'm confident in saying that he was completely ahead of his time. As I mentioned, the majority of people who were really on the Vine kick during its reign on the internet belonged to Gen Z, and the common assessment about their style of humor is that it has developed into complete absurdity, almost to the point of anti-humor. Looking at his Vines, that's exactly what Garrett specialized in. He's a master of presenting an incredibly weird situation to the viewer, escalating the weirdness throughout the video, providing absolutely zero context for said situation, and leaving the viewer in hilarious bewilderment. Not to get ahead of myself, but that's exactly how his humor is calibrated in the present day, which is indicative of the authenticity that Garrett commits to his art, it's not someone being quirky for the sake of quirky. You can tell that he is genuinely the way he comes off in those vines, and he managed to gain success on the platform through being a legitimate person and not being a scummy human being. Speaking of a scummy human being, although Garrett did garner some attention from Vine, he really started to flourish when he hit the YouTube scene. Not only was his editing style and boisterous personality more suited for the latter site, but he was also being endorsed by and collaborating with everyone's least favorite pig, Shane Dawson. Whether anyone wants to admit it or not, there is a high chance that Garrett simply wouldn't be in the position that he is now if he hadn't become both business and content partners with Dawson. It's not like the relationship wasn't mutually beneficial though, as Garrett was the catalyst that started swinging Dawson's content from mind-numbing food videos to the more IRL and documentary style content that he became renowned for in the late 2010s. Garrett also provided Dawson with his cameraman and editor for all those videos, Andrew Sawicki, who, in all reality, is the only reason that audience members were calling his videos high-value productions. If you were to look at Shane's new videos that do not include Andrew, you can definitely tell how much of a downgrade the post-production received after he parted ways with Dawson. Also, if you look back to the comment sections of Dawson videos in which Garrett played a significant role in, a large portion are gushing over how adorable he is, while the ones from present day are talking about how much they miss the person that Dawson was around Garrett, as opposed to his contemporary bestie, Jeffree Star, who he still makes videos with to this day. The point is that one would have to be blind to not see how much value Garrett added to the channel, being the perfect bubbly idealist counter to the incessantly frumpy and irritated Dawson is anything but an easy feat. Yet Garrett was able to do so by just letting the purity and wholesome nature of his soul ride free and unbridled. Listen, I'm not someone who claims to be the master of what makes a joke funny, although I do study humor as an art form in my spare time, and I am a believer in it being mostly subjective. But I've always viewed people who get most of their reactions from berating another person as the lowest common denominator. One of the things that is made clear from the first time you click on a Garrett Watts video is that he is an extraordinarily passionate person. From Harry Potter to Marvel to James Blake to Frank Ocean, the amount of love and ardor that Garrett has for the things that he cares about is one of the many attributes that draws his audience members towards him. I'm not particularly fond of roughly half of the things that he holds dearly, but even I, who we've already established as a cynical human being, can't help but be infected with sunshine whenever Garrett is getting excited about something. In fact, you would think that would be the general reaction of any normal human being. If someone gives out positivity and interest, it would usually provoke the same type of energy from everyone else involved in the conversation. According to Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler, professors at Harvard and UC San Diego respectively, one's happiness is directly related to the happiness of the friends that surround them, with each happy friend increasing the possibility of their own happiness by roughly 9%. Alas, whenever Garrett would start getting exuberant about his interests, whether that be having those interests shared with a guest on the channel or them being brought up in a random conversation, Dawson would immediately shut down the subjects and ridicule Garrett for being into said interests. That's not even the extent of it, as throughout the run from 2017 to 2019, Dawson went on with his squad that completely revitalized his career. The punching bag of the group was clearly Garrett. I'm not against the idea of having a member of a friend group getting the brunt of the jokes, but the only way that that can work is if the person on the receiving end is visibly okay with it. The problem with this specific scenario is that in the majority of the clips, you can tell that he is rather uncomfortable with the jokes or comments being made about him. Dawson & Co. had a habit of playing on his insecurities and taking advantage of his good-natured spirit and twisting it into him being weird. Specifically, Dawson had a habit of getting everyone to alienate him and even physically harm him for no reason whatsoever, which takes on a whole new meaning when you take into account that Dawson and Garrett did date previously, And there are some old podcast clips that see him acting rather spiteful and aggressive against Garrett.
I know he does look. I remember your Tinder. You look better. Doesn't he look better?
No, but I think I photograph better, just in general.
No. His Tinder looked like a weird,
douche.
gay, like, by the way, spoiler, he's very gay, but like a gay, like, Gossip Girl actor type who's like annoying and does coke and like the worst. Oh. But I wanted to date that for a second just so I could like get it out of my system and like find a norm.
You kind of just saw him as a whole.
Ooh,
True.
I saw him as a gaping hole to fill.
Yeah, kind of. Well, that's when I first met you. I thought you were just kind of a hole that Shane was.
No, I found him, he's just the cut, and I'm trying to get in that cut. First of all, he didn't take me to a restaurant like a fucking human, because he's like, no, I'm going to do the trick where he like took me to some weird like fucking house.
Well, you
like,
made him dress up in a wrestling outfit.
He's flexing right now because it was charming. And
it wasn't. It was, okay, I was thinking Mexican food, chips and salsa, drink, let's do this. He's like, he's like, backed up a fucking picnic, and I got this house that my uncle owns, and we're just gonna sit on the porch or something. Right? And I was just
sweet.
like, what? But I didn't know him, so I'm like, this is not your uncle's house because it was a nice house. I'm like, where are we? This is weird. I'm like, he's into like breaking into people's houses, and then we're eating, and I'm freezing. It's like 0 degrees, and then the whole time you're just like, yeah, it's crazy. Like, what do you think about the stars? I'm like, I don't want to do that. And I'm like, I don't know. Let's talk shit about something. I was like, what is this? And then we got in your car, and then you're like, I'm gonna take you on a journey of the city, and then you walked me around the city. He took me on the roof of a Jamba Juice. I don't know why.
What? Is that where you get the most dick?
Yeah.
What? On the roof of a Jamba Juice?
Look, people like effort, all right? And so even if effort shows itself in a strange way, people like dates.
I think the problem is that's
Yeah,
the kind of
I
date
do.
you have after for like a 1 year anniversary. Like, remember when we went here? You doing that with someone you don't know, really have
Right.
mutual friends with. They're kind of like, is he just a serial killer? No. You know what I mean?
I thought he was, but I also said that to you. I said, I kind of think you're a sociopath and maybe a serial killer, but like that's kind of my thing. So all right.
Allowing me to be momentarily speculative, the vocal tone that Dawson takes in this conversation makes it seem like Garrett was the one who ended things and Dawson never got over that, up until the two permanently parted ways. That would explain the constant vitriol that he has towards Garrett and the incessant need to make him feel lesser than, especially in front of his current fiancée. Getting back to the matter at hand, this isn't a sparse happening either. This is a trend that you can see in almost every video that the two feature in together. It's so noticeable that there are a number of compilations out there that recount all of the moments in which Garrett gets made fun of by Dawson and his crew in an unfair manner. To give you a better understanding of what I'm talking about, here are a couple examples.
Also, look, this is a mosquito. It's a mosquito's foot at 800 times magnification. Isn't that cool?
Garrett, literally no one cares.
I care. I care.
Here's what happened. You came into the hotel and I said, ew.
I got that Hufflepuff flow. We love friendship and playing in the snow. Well, you know about Harry Potter. You knew what I
I specifically told him, I said, hey, do you hate Harry Potter? And he said, yeah, I f***ing hate that gay And I said, great, come on over.
This is like Harry Potter?
Oh no, oh God. No, we're not doing that.
Oh, do you like Harry Potter?
I was specifically instructed not to speak of anything Harry Potter.
Change the subject.
What's that December me right across the neck?
And then the whole day, we have to like pretend like you're dead, and every time you say one of your like crappy Harry Potter jokes,
They're not crappy.
we all just go.
So, take a moment and put yourself in Garrett's shoes. If you were a part of a friend group that you spent most of your time with, and that group was constantly reprimanding you for literally being yourself, how would you handle that situation? I think that there's a parallel to be drawn here with high school bullying. In a 2020 study conducted by Diane Felmley, a sociology and demography professor at Penn State, she found that there is a higher chance that a student is bullied by peers that they consider their friends as opposed to those who aren't close to the student. There was also a correlation between the bullying of a friend and social climbing, and if there's one person who has been known for social climbing with no regards to the feelings of those around him over the past 2 years, it is Dawson. I hope you don't mind me getting anecdotal for just a moment here, but I have witnessed this type of antagonizing among friend groups, and the most common response is one of two things. The person getting bullied will either conform and rid themselves of the thing that they are getting bullied for, or they will lose all their self-esteem and just slink into the background which can be super detrimental to the progress of a teenager's social skills. That's why it's so impressive that Garrett has avoided doing either. Although you can definitely tell that the comments Dawson and co. made about him get to him in the moment, it never deterred him from being the positive light that most of Dawson's fan base looked forward to seeing in his videos. He would get pushed down and spring right back up 5 seconds later, and without his resilient spirit being able to do that, the videos would just be a bunch of the same joke and facial expression over and over again. In an atmosphere where his light was being suppressed to the nth degree, he managed to just shine even brighter. It's also ironic that Dawson was so critical and aloof towards Garrett, considering that he was responsible for tens of millions of views on his channel. One of the series that kickstarted the renaissance of Dawson's channel was titled by the internet as Spooky Boys, where Dawson, Garrett, and Drew Monson would go and get into scary antics and situations. And when it came to the ideas and execution of those ideas, Garrett came up with almost all of them, even when the others would be hesitant and scoff at the plan he laid out before them. Garrett would still manage to pull a really solid video out of thin air through his sheer interest in the game they were playing or the activity they were participating in. In fact, I'd argue by the end of the tenure on his channel, people were coming to Dawson's channel for Garrett just as much as the titular sociopath. But as I mentioned, his run on the channel did come to an end, which coincided with the cancellation of Dawson, and that was undoubtedly the best thing that could have happened to Garrett. He was able to focus all of the energy he had allocated to helping the pig to his own channel, which was the best thing that could have happened to him. A problem that I've observed over my time on YouTube is whenever a person who is solely a side character on another's channel attempts to separate themselves and create their own content, it's very difficult for them to achieve a high level of success. Recently, with cases like Carl Jacobs and Chris White, the success stories have increased, but it's still a rarity. The reason for this is usually because side characters don't have the time to flesh out their personalities unless it's in relation to the main character. As we've established, against Dawson's will, Garrett carved out a very specific image of wholesomeness and positivity, which was in direct contrast to the rest of Dawson's clique. And as sardonic as the internet may seem, there's always a soft spot in people's heart for an unabashedly and authentically hopeful creator. Moving forward onto his more solo work, there are many things that stick out in Garrett's personality that make him relatable to the everyman. Ironically enough, the first reason is that he kinda is an everyman. I don't like to speak hyperbolically, but once a YouTuber hits a certain level of success, there are certain lifestyle changes that come with it, regardless of how they carry themselves and their presence online. Once that level of success is hit, the privilege of wealth starts to be shown, whether it's intentional or not. House tours, signature clothing brands, no matter what genre of YouTube one is in, they start to show a more lavish lifestyle in one way or another. You see it all the time, as whenever someone reaches the top and starts either intentionally or inadvertently showing it off, they will receive an influx of people saying, "You've changed," or that they missed the old version of said influencer. For the record, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. It's just something noticeable. And personally, I don't blame them at all for doing so, as we've been bred by the media to believe that the natural thing to do when one accrues in excess of money is to spend it on things that are held as status makers, which have been held to that regard by the media. It's a whole cyclical scam, but once again, that's for another video. Anywho, one of the things that his viewership loves the most about him is that Garrett does not fall under that category in any regard. And there are a lot of ways to approach this subject, so let's start with the surface level. Materialism is huge in YouTube culture, and just culture in general, which is why it's so refreshing to find someone who doesn't fall into that way of thinking. If you were to take a look into his analytics, he is pulling in, for the most part, at least 1 million views a month. Taking into consideration that his content is also family friendly, which is something we'll get into later, it's safe to assume that his CPM, which stands for cost per 1,000 impressions, is pretty high. I mean, mine was $3 when I was making 10-minute video essays on YouTubers, so I have to imagine that his stats are relatively similar, if not higher, in that regard. Plus, adding on the fact that his videos almost never fall below 30 minutes, there are more opportunities for mid-rolls. And because his content is so family friendly, and he has a high level of engagement for his subscribers compared to his views, he gets a sponsor on almost every video he makes. And those sponsors are likely to come with a higher price tag because of his high engagement in... Sorry, I know I just went on a technical mumbo-jumbo tangent, but I promise there's a reason for doing so. All of that is to say that it is safe to assume that Garrett has made a lot of money from his content over the years, so much so that it would be a natural step of progression to see him fall in line with the clout culture that YouTube often provides. Instead, he acts as an antithesis to the norm on all fronts. In terms of living situation, for the first 2.5 years he gained a lot of traction and could have very likely bought one of those giant mansions that YouTubers show off under the guise of house tours. Up until roughly a year ago, Garrett rented out a tiny house that had about as much room in it from what I could observe as a 2-bedroom apartment for 2.5 years, based on his video dates. Now, in the middle of Los Angeles, renting out any house is insanely expensive. Considering that Garrett was someone who was business partners with Shane Dawson, however, his living situation still seemed pretty modest. In fact, it's incredibly modest, and that's the running theme of Garrett's channel and lifestyle that really hits home with his audience. As opposed to assimilating into the large conglomerate of creators who include their wealth as a prominent part of their content, he instead focuses on cultivating a certain homey and inviting environment. For example, he may not have luxury vehicles or acres of land to show off, but he does have a plethora of mini skeletons and tiny replicas of everyday items completely engulfing his residence. Instead of seeing a house that looks like a living space of someone that you would aspire to be, you see a house of someone who you are at this very moment in time. Garrett, for all intents and purposes, is the everyman of YouTube, and I mean that as the biggest compliment that I could possibly give. Every creator on the website strives for one thing more than anything else, and that is relatability. You see, the more relatable that they come off to their audience, the more invested the audience becomes in every aspect of their lives. And the more invested the audience becomes, the more willing they become to show their support through different ventures and avenues, such as buying merchandise or buying tickets for an event that they are throwing. And the cycle continues on and on and on and on. It's very difficult to achieve a high level of relatability, especially when it's very apparent to people over the age of 10 that their creators are only attempting to reach the level of relatability in order to use their audience as a cash cow. We've seen countless creators, from Lele Pons to the Ace family to Rice Gum, swing and miss spectacularly in doing so. It's very difficult to balance flaunting a life of luxury and trying to connect with the broke college kid watching you in their 8x8 square foot dorm without the scales tipping heavily in the former's direction. So what is the secret behind the immense amount of relatability that Garrett manages to garner, which is something that other creators in similar spaces as him could only dream of? Well, you see, it's very simple. He's just himself. Garrett openly embraces the little quirks about his personality that others would attempt to gloss over. He proudly geeks out about everything Marvel at least once in every video. His most prized possession that he constantly shows off is a baby doll named Benjamin, who is very likely possessed by a demonic spirit that is begging to be released. He often takes a visit to the estate that he built in his tiny front yard, aptly named Bug Manor, which is outfitted with an actual house, an elderly caretaker named Rose, and his mice Popcorn and Echo. He doesn't need to try to be relatable, he just is relatable by embracing the things about him that others wouldn't be so open about. Imagine if Austin McBroom dedicated a part of his videos to actively discuss his hypothetical love for building model planes. In the modern landscape of YouTube and with the persona that he has assembled, I don't think it would go over very well. And the reason behind that, at least from what I've deduced, is that fans of those types of content creators watch said content not because they actually care about the creator, but because they are interested in the cool things that they get to do because of the position that they're in. Just imagine though, if Austin McBroom started detailing his excursions in and passion for model plane building that he's been doing since 10 years old, instead of him fighting Bryce Hall or KSI. The key difference there is that nobody else in the world has had a boxing match with Bryce Hall. but every single person on this planet has something that they are passionate about. That's exactly what Garrett does so well. His passion for things in life and the fervor in which he converses about them with his viewers immediately gives them something that they can latch onto. He lives his life like any ordinary person with an extraordinary imagination and ability to create. Speaking of, I think it's time for me to transition over to focusing on his content. But first, I would like to say that I'm aware that you've been watching a video essay deconstructing what makes a YouTuber great for a rather long time now. 36 minutes to be exact. Well, at the audio-wise, it's probably longer video-wise anyways. So I would like to interject with a brief intermission for which I have prepared a slideshow maybe, if I want to. If I don't, it's just going to be images. All right, banking on the 1% chance that Garrett is watching this video right now, I would like to say hello. I think you're wonderful, and I would like to submit my formal dating application. Who am I? My name is Colin Andrews. I'm 25 and I'm from Michigan, but I promise I hate it just as much as everyone else does. I'm currently on a road trip in an RV, traveling around the country for the next year or so, but I'm looking to settle down in a tiny house by 2022, somewhere on the West Coast. And maybe it could be with you. I'm just kidding, but not really. I love going to movie theaters, listening to classical music, talking about reality television, playing card games, drinking water, and watching Jeopardy every weeknight. Even though that information may indicate that I'm in my 70s, I promise you that's not the case. Oh, and I love making YouTube videos. Obviously. Now, you may be asking yourself at this point, all this sounds fine and dandy, but why in the heck should I even consider this and not click off the video immediately and file a restraining order? Well, lucky for you, I've created a comprehensive list of pros and cons to dating me that is tailor-made for you. Let's start, shall we? Pro. I'm somewhere between 6'3" and 6'4", so we won't look ridiculous together. Yay! Con. I'm clinically depressed, and I have been since I was 9. Aww. Pro. I've pretty much worked through all of my trauma, and I'm feeling as comfortable about myself as I ever have. Yay! Con. I really don't like Marvel movies. Aww. Pro. I'm a big movie guy, so I'll still watch them with you and talk about them as much as your heart desires. Yay! Con. I'm not a big anime guy either. Aww. Pro, I think James Blake is brilliant, and If the Car Beside You Moves Ahead is one of my favorite songs of all time. Yay! Con, I'm 25, so there's gonna be an age difference there. Aww. Pro, I'm great with parents, and I'm not one of those people who says I'm great with parents and I'm actually just blind to the fact that someone could possibly not like me. Your family will 100% love me. Yay! Con, I am a sore loser when it comes to Mario Kart, so you'd have to accept that. Aww. Pro, I'm a musician and I would write you a multitude of songs with you as my muse. Yay! Con, I've never been in a relationship with a guy before, so it'd take me a while to get used to the dynamics of that. Aww. Pro, I think you are one of the sweetest and most genuine people that we have on this platform, and I would make sure to reassure you of those things every morning when I wake up next to you and every night when we go to sleep. Yay! Con, I made a whole video about parasocial relationships, and I still don't know that I'm in one. Aww. So that concludes my official application to be your boyfriend, Mr. Watts. I hope you take it into consideration. Contrary to one of the statements that I just made, one of the other things that I admire about Garrett is his relationship with his audience. Recently, very popular content creators have spoken a lot about parasocial relationships, and they definitely have the right idea about the facade of friendship that some viewers have when consuming someone's content in heavy doses. That being said, one of the things that I have noticed about creators who take those stances is that for the most part, they don't really even attempt to interact with their viewers. If you look in a YouTube comments section, generally the only hearted and replied to comments are those of said YouTuber's peers. If you go on Twitter, there is mainly, once again, interactions between YouTubers and their peers and not their fans. This isn't meant to shade those people, as when you garner a large fan base, the ability to pay attention to individuals can be anywhere from very difficult to completely impossible. Yet, somehow, Garrett makes it look easy. Of course, it's impossible to respond to everyone, unless you're a creator who's around my size. The thing that impresses me about Garrett is that you can tell he is always checking in on his fans in the comments. There could be a video uploaded a year ago, and if someone left a comment on it that drew his attention, he would respond. From that alone, it's pretty clear to me anyways that Garrett, like many other people on the platform proclaim, doesn't view his audience as numbers, but instead as a community of people with whom he wouldn't be where he is right now without. Also, at the end of every one of his videos, he asks the viewer a question, which I'm aware is generally a ploy to increase the interactions in the comments and boost the video in the algorithm. Garrett, however, at least attempts to take a look at some of the comments, or at least recognize how amazing the answers were. Then he proposes another question and the cycle continues. I know this is rather minuscule in comparison to a lot of the other things I've talked about and will be talking about, but I still think it's a valid action to help further the idea of his ability to maintain an authentic sense of positivity without getting bogged down by all of the pressure that creators find themselves under. I think now is as good a time as any to move on to the thing that was the inspiration for this video, and that would be Garrett's content itself. I mean, when you find a creator, that's what distinguishes themselves as an individual. And all the stuff that I talked about previously are awesome facts that you start to uncover the more and more you invest yourself. If I were to use two adjectives to describe the current environment that YouTube has morphed into in the present day, that would most definitely be immediate and grandiose. We are in a space and time, mostly due to technology, but that's a tougher topic for another day, yeah, we get it, where everything is a big spectacle and happening in rapid succession. The perfect example for this is the recent Squid Game video produced by Mr. Beast. Although I definitely find the whole thing really weird and a little tasteless, which multiple people have already touched on, it's a perfect example of what the ideal YouTube video looks like. It's about a trending subject, it cost millions of dollars to produce, and it's arguably one of the biggest productions, at least from an authentic YouTuber and paid for by an authentic YouTuber, that the site has ever seen. At the time of me writing this, the video has racked up 132 million views in the span of 6 days, which is only 7 million less than the total of his last 3 videos combined. That means that the algorithm that Mr. Beast is already a favorite of gave him a 200% increase of traction for this video, which Donaldson has confirmed is their most expensive venture yet. The channel also received the most subscribers in a day ever with 1.4 million. So, considering that this is the most popular non-music video of all time, it's apparent that this is the direction that YouTube wants to take its content in. And we kind of always knew that, considering that since the dawn of time, the platform has pushed to the forefront either already established mainstream media channels, for example, Will Smith, Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, or incredibly marketable creators without a speck of dust on their nose. All signs have pointed towards Wajiki and her crew moving towards the platform being a clean and polished member of the mainstream media. Is that completely contradictory to the original purpose of the platform, and would that completely remove the novelty and brilliance of the site completely? Yes, but once again, another topic for another day. Sorry, I'm really bad at avoiding tangents. So if the Mr. Beast Squid Game video is the epitome of what to strive towards in order to be successful as a creator, how would you describe a half-an-hour video about a grown adult going through the entire process of baking a cake for a rat that lives in his backyard? Or what about a 40-minute video about attempting and ultimately failing to wake up at 5 in the morning and do one productive thing every day for a week? Or another half-an-hour video about the same grown adult escaping into the woods while being completely unprepared and only making it about 5 hours or so before going home and getting Taco Bell. If you haven't guessed by the footage yet, these are all videos that you can find on Garrett's channel. And the interesting thing about them is that they are absolutely the antithesis of what I've just been describing. If the content YouTube is looking for are big budget action movies directed by the Russo brothers and starring The Rock and Will Smith, who both ironically do have YouTube channels that have been thrust at the forefront of the site, then Garrett's videos are lo-fi indie comedies directed by Jeff Bana and starring Alison Brie and the Duplass brothers. God, I hope that made any type of sense. They're about as far apart as they could be, but if you look at the view count on those videos, they're still at 2.5 million, 6 million, and 800,000 respectively, which are very impressive numbers and well balanced compared to his subscriber count. See, the thing that YouTube seems to have forgotten in their quest for being viewed as a legitimate heavyweight in the entertainment industry is that what differentiates them from other mediums is their authenticity. The majority of media consists of people getting paid to be something that they're not. YouTube is a place that, in direct contrast, relies on the fact that, for the most part, the viewer is watching everyday people just like them. However, because of the direction that the staff is taking the website, that type of content is becoming less and less profitable. Sure, there's a niche of people who see that problem and love to support independent creators, but you can only get so far with a niche audience. What you can do, referencing back to the Squid Game video, is make content that falls in line with what YouTube wants to see. I know that description was a tad elongated, but that's another reason that I have this intense respect for Garrett. He not only does whatever he wants, but there's little to no consistency to it, just like life itself. One video he can be creating a nostalgia-filled mimic of an average 90s bedroom, and the next he can be exploring one of the most haunted locations in the entirety of the United States. The key is, though, whenever I watch one of his videos, even ones where a connection that he wouldn't have had if he wasn't a big creator is involved, I never look at him and say, hey, I'm excited to watch this video from my favorite YouTuber. Instead, I usually say, I can't wait to see what absolute shenanigans Garrett gets up to in this video. That's not to be mistaken as me viewing my viewership as a parasocial relationship. Instead, my intention with that statement is to say that I view it as more organic, incredibly down to earth, and directly resonant. Just for clarity's sake, other people that I would put in the same category are creators like Anthpo, Enya Umanzor, Your Rage, and Tom Harlock. These are people who just exist on the internet as themselves and manage to find success and a very loyal fan base through being true to who they are. I'm friends with a decent amount of YouTubers, and the one thing that they constantly say is, I just want to get to a point where I can make whatever the heck I want and people will support it because they like me. Honestly, that's what I aspire to as well, reaching a place with my audience where I can talk about the commentary community one day and the fact that Evan Mobley is having one of the greatest rookie seasons of all time the next. And my audience will watch it because they want to hear what I have to say. I think Garrett has been able to achieve this because from the jump, he just made whatever he wanted. One of the most fortified ways of finding success on the site is by honing in on a specific subject to focus your content on. The problem with doing such is that over time, people develop and find different interests, but since they've already boxed themselves into a certain crowd, if they try to deviate from doing such, 90% of the time their viewership falls off drastically. Even I'm aware of this to a certain extent, as I'd argue one of the downfalls of my previous channel, other than significant time between uploads, was that I got popular off of one style of video about a group of people and I never stuck to that formula because it wasn't who I was. So on this new venture, I'm making separate channels for everything that I want to talk about in order to give my audience clear paths to the type of content they would enjoy from me. In contrast, Garrett's only through line in any of his videos, aside from an underlying scary season vibe, is that he is in them. That takes some insane charisma to pull off, and Garrett, along with the list of people that I mentioned as well, have it in droves. Revisiting the overarching theme of simplicity that permeates through Garrett's content, another thing that I really appreciate is his ability to capture the small moments that matter the most. I don't want to just rehash the point about the grandiose manner in which YouTube is taking their platform, but I just kind of did it regardless, didn't I? Anyways, as every single minimalist has been telling me since I started traveling in this RV, it's the little things in life that matter the most. And as much as I'm not one for corny one-liners that have been repeated ad nauseum, I can't help but agree. I want to take a look at a specific part of one of Garrett's videos entitled A Day in My Life. The majority of the video plays out as a normal day in my life video would. Well, about as normal as a video by Garrett during the pandemic can get. He goes through his routines about not being routine in a routine sort of way until we get to the culminating activity that he's hyped up throughout the entire video for his usual companion, Andrew Sawicki. For approximately the last 6 minutes of the video, before the outro that is, the two friends have a party on the roof of Garrett's tiny house consisting of a pizza, a keyboard, some magazines, and other miscellaneous objects. The view for said party is the sunset over the skyline of Los Angeles in August of 2020, which was still the height of the pandemic. For the most part, Garrett just sits up there, playing his keyboard and singing about how weird everything in the world is at the moment, before Andrew convinces him to get down and they finish the pizza inside his house. For some reason or another, that is one of the most accurate depictions of the worldwide feeling of quarantine that I've ever seen. Attempting to do something creative with the resources that you have in your own personal space, all the while yearning for the normalcy of years past. And finally, after all of that, settling in and enjoying a moment that most people wouldn't have the opportunity to enjoy as often without the quarantine forcing them into it. Through that small moment, which most people would view as insignificant, Garrett has managed to unintentionally say more about the state of the world than most could ever hope to. He's not forcing a message out there or blatantly trying to push a narrative. He's just living life as he does and letting us see it through his eyes, and the messages write themselves for the people at home watching. Being able to draw people in through flashy methods is easy, but being able to draw people in through the little everyday things is something that should be heralded at a higher level on this platform. Being honest with you folks, I don't really have a good transition for this. So, I'm just going to start talking about his podcast and you can pretend that I came up with a witty segue, all right? Cool. The podcast, appropriately titled Sweet Boys, is the quarantine project of Garrett and Andrew, which debuted in November of 2020. Its first season concluded in May of 2020, and they have taken a break ever since, with a promise of more avenues of creation for the Sweet Boys universe in the future. Now, the question that would be apt to discuss here is what the podcast is about. I mean, most podcasts revolve around a subject of interest to the hosts, which we have already confirmed are bountiful in regards to Garrett, and the podcasts which are more conversation-based thrive off the fact that the person or persons at the helm are very interesting characters with life experience and or knowledge that one wouldn't be able to receive elsewhere. So, where do Garrett and Andrew fall on that spectrum? Well, as an answer, I would like to tell you that the Sweet Boys podcast is about nothing. And I know people out there will call me out for hyperbole, but in this case, I am as serious as the prisoner guy from Harry Potter. Let me paint you a picture. You've just finished a long day of either work or school, and you come over to your best friend's house to hang out. As soon as the two of you settle in for the night, you immediately embark on a conversation where you just let everything out. Things going on in your life, any minutia that has interested you over the past day, you go down a random, continuous, and never-ending rabbit hole of subjects that have absolutely no correlation to each other until it's 4 a.m. and the two of you are so exhausted that you just have to go to sleep. That, in a nutshell, is the best way that I can describe Sweet Boys to someone who hasn't listened to it before. It's just two guys shooting the breeze like they would on any given day of the week. Now, is this revolutionary? No, there are a lot of podcasts that are just kind of two people having a conversation, but even in those, I feel like there are at least a couple of talking points that they want to hit on or the framework of a structure that they follow. This is very much not the same with Garrett and Andrew. One of the ways that you can see this is the way in which they implement sponsorships into the podcast. Most shows have designated time for ad reads and use them as a way to break up the podcast into segments, using it as TV would for a commercial break. If we compare this to the subject at hand, the ad reads are hastily inserted at points that can barely be considered cutoffs, appropriately titled sponsor mode, and they are recorded after the initial podcast has concluded, or before it began. I don't really know about that, which is an indicator of how truly raw and organic the material being displayed is. They don't want to interrupt the flow of conscious of the conversation, so they just throw in ads in post, which brings me to my next point. I would not call myself a connoisseur of podcasts, but what I can say rather certainly is that I've never heard one that is more natural than this one. I know that I've stated this multiple times throughout this section, but it is literally About nothing. And when I brought this up to my friends, they countered with a couple of podcasts they thought did very similar things, those counters being Views and TMG, which are appropriate considering they're both YouTuber podcasts themselves. Although I can see where they're coming from on a surface level, there is a very important distinction to be made that can be best identified by looking at the titles. While the aforementioned shows have titles such as Becoming Joe Rogan or Dating an Adult Actor, Sweet Boys has such titles as This Whole Thing Was a Mistake or We Have No Idea What We're Doing. While the former seem to spend time discussing either other people and entities or crazy stories of what has happened to them in their lives, the latter spend a good chunk of their time getting lost down a spiraled path of random stories or subjects that intertwine with each other to the point where you can't even remember what was going on 10 minutes ago. Some people would view that as a negative, but as you can tell, I am not one of those people. There's such a unique charm to it, as these are two people who have structured their show to the point where it would almost be impossible to be successful. Between the lack of structure and the constant racing tempo that can be difficult to keep up with, that's a pretty big hole to dig yourself into. Yet through the sheer power of their charisma, chemistry, and relatability to the average person, without coming off as one of those cringy #relatable Instagram posts, they have managed to create one of the only podcasts that I have genuinely enjoyed in years. It seriously has Garrett's handprints of creating a positive atmosphere all over it, as the conversations almost seem to take place on another plane of existence where camaraderie is at the forefront and all the negativity of the present is just a mere whistle of wind in the distance. It's a feeling that is unlike anything else out there, and definitely one that embodies the beauty of Garrett's personal content. Now, I know this may delegitimize the video essay-ness of this a bit, but I always like to get anecdotal in my videos, so I hope you don't mind me doing so here. After all, if I were to explain to y'all every single reason why Garrett is one of the most positive creators on the platform, and I never gave my personal experience interacting with the subject, I feel like I would be doing you all a disservice. So, 2021 was a really horrible year for me, for many reasons that I may or may not get into during a more personal video, but one of the worst things that happened to me last year is my relationship ending after 2 years. I was waiting for my girlfriend to come home from work to our apartment in order to give her my presents for our 2-year anniversary, which was literally that day. And when she finally came back at 1 a.m, she revealed that she was breaking up with me. We got into a pretty big argument, and I decided to leave in order to get some much needed space. I drove to a gas station, got some hot Cheetos and some water, went to my mom's house and lay down on the bed in her spare bedroom. Like, I was shocked. I was sad. I was feeling the wave of 2 years being effectively wasted on someone who at one point I thought I was potentially going to be engaged to, crashing right over me. And I'm not really a crier, so I didn't, but I could kind of feel a knot in my chest start to tighten, and that's never really a good thing, since I wasn't in full-blown panic mode, which I've experienced a couple of times. I managed to process the fact that I needed something to distract myself. And the first thing I clicked on was the most recent Garrett video, which had come out about a month ago, about creating the 90s room. As the video went on, and the insanity of random puppies, talking bugs, and an excessive variety of trolls continued to spiral, I started to slip farther and farther into a trance. There were multiple comments on one of my old videos about the Sweet Boys podcast that I may or may not have used an excerpt from for this video. Shh, don't tell anybody, please. They stated they had ADHD, and it was one of the only things that they could zone in on. Myself, I definitely do not have ADHD, and therefore can't understand the exact feeling, but considering that my mind was racing a mile a minute in a plethora of places, Garrett's hectic nature was able to keep up with the pace of my mind and distract me from focusing on my current situation. It worked so well, in fact, that I continued watching the rest of his catalog for the whole night until I drifted off to sleep at roughly 4 a.m. I woke up for work at 8, and even though I was tired from a lack of sleep, I was in a much better place emotionally than I had been the last night. Although I want to give credit to the hot Cheetos, which would be pretty funny, the thing that really got me to a place where I was ready to take on the day was Garrett and his videos. Trust me, I'm quite aware that this comes off as corny, so I don't blame you at all if you scoff at it. But at a turning point where I could have handled a life-changing event either very well or very poorly, Garrett's content that I had somewhat taken for granted helped me lean towards the former. After I finished work, I called my ex and we had a long conversation about everything, and we agreed to end things amicably and still be friends. We hung out for the whole month and even lived together for the month or so until the lease was up. The two of us drifted apart after we both moved to different sides of the country, but that's besides the point. When you're growing up, one of the main things that teachers and parental figures around you preach is that positivity is contagious. Well, that's a real thing, and it's called emotional contagion, which although it sounds like a very bad thing in our current time in history, it's actually rather beneficial. If you're constantly setting a standard of a positive mindset, there's a high chance that the people around you will mimic said positivity. John T. Cacioppo from the University of Chicago found that the more expressive a person's face is, the more likely you are to mimic it due to an unintentional activation of muscle fibers, which then relay that feeling to the brain. This would be a succinct explanation as to why Garrett's content elicits such an extremely warm response from people, as he's almost always smiling and belly laughing, thus transferring those emotions unconsciously over to his viewers. So during that night my ex broke up with me, not only was I able to zone in on his content because of its hectic nature, but it was also able to put me in a better mood and by proxy, calm me down to handle the situation in a more responsible fashion. So from that point on, when I found myself in stressful situations, I put in my earbuds, put a playlist of his videos on, and let myself become absorbed into the lovely insanity that is his content. Whatever the situation may be, somehow, some way, the result of a chaotic calm has been the same every time. Stories like the one that I just told can be found scattered throughout almost every comment section of Garrett's videos. Even though in one of his videos he compares himself to the quirky younger brother in an indie comedy to his audience, he acts as the quirky older brother in an indie comedy. He is honest to a fault about his deficiencies, but he has an incredibly big heart and perfect advice that is tailored to every single situation the people around him find themselves in. Sure, he's not perfect, but nobody is, and that's what makes him so special. Garrett has found a way to thrive on a platform that is essentially fixed against him succeeding. In a generation of massive spectacles, he's acted as the perfect counter by embracing the marvel, pun intended, of everyday life and all of the wonder that it has to offer. In a space where people have, on multiple occasions, tried to subdue his positivity and passion, he's managed to break through and shine like the star he was always meant to be. For all intents and purposes, Garrett is the perfect example of an underdog story for YouTube. He's the oddball who accumulated a giant fan base of people just like him, who may or may not have had a role model on the internet quite like him at all. So, for all of us underdogs out there who have found solace in your authentic insanity any time in the past decade, I want to give a giant thank you. Your positivity in a space that is predominantly filled with negativity doesn't go unnoticed. And now, the only thing left to do is please bring back the Sweet Boys channel. It's been 7 months. You expect me to just keep repeating the same videos over and over again when I'm on the road? Please, I'm begging you, please. So, that's my first video. If you are watching this right now, I want to just say thank you for starting this new journey with me. I'm so appreciative, you have no idea. I plan on uploading a video essay like this every 2 weeks. And once we achieve certain milestones on this channel, it will unlock more channels with more content on them. I'd like to give a giant shout out to my patrons Weston Katecki and Carl McGee, and my producer, the BC Film Reviews. If you have any interest supporting more content like this and getting some pretty cool perks that I just updated, you can find the link to my Patreon in the description. Once again, thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.